It was supposed to be a routine patrol, a joint US and Nigerian reconnaissance team moving through the scrubland of southwest Niger. No one expected a firefight. No one planned for a war that day. But on the morning of October 4th, 2017, just outside a small village called Tongo Tongo, everything changed. Outnumbered, outgunned, ambushed in broad daylight by militants from the Islamic State in the Greater Sahara. For nearly an hour, 11 American soldiers and their Nigerian partners fought for their lives. 4 Americans wouldn't make it out. 1 was separated and hunted down alone. Their final moments were chaotic, brutal, heroic. The world barely knew there were US troops in Niger, let alone that they were dying there. When the news finally broke, it sparked outrage, confusion, and uncomfortable questions. What were American troops doing in such a remote part of Africa? Why weren't they properly supported? And why did it take an ambush to bring the mission into the spotlight? This is not just the story of an ambush. It's the story of a mission gone sideways, of men sent to track ghosts in a war no one was watching, a war that had already begun. This is the Battle of Tongo Tongo. Niger is one of the poorest nations in the world, a landlocked country in the heart of the Sahel, where the Sahara Desert begins to bleed south into scrubland and savanna. It borders Mali, Nigeria, Chad, Libya, each with its own tangled insurgencies. By 2017, the Sahel had become a hotspot for jihadist groups. Al-Qaeda affiliates and the Islamic State in the Greater Sahara, ISGS, were exploiting porous borders, weak governments, and economic desperation to gain territory. The United States had quietly ramped up its presence in West Africa, deploying small teams of special operations forces to work by, with, and through local militaries. The goal wasn't direct combat. It was training, advising, and gathering intelligence. But the lines blurred quickly. Missions became riskier, the enemy became harder to track, and the terrain, remote, arid, unfamiliar, became a liability. In the months leading up to the ambush, attacks by ISGS were on the rise. A month before the Americans deployed, the group had kidnapped and executed a Malian border officer. They were probing, testing their reach. And the US and its partners were trying to respond with limited assets and unclear objectives. Tongo Tongo would become the first time most Americans realized their country was at war in Niger. On October 3rd, 2017, a team of 11 American soldiers, mostly GreenBerets from the 3rd Special Forces Group, set out from a small outpost in Oualam, Niger. Their objective: a kill or capture mission aimed at a high-value ISGS target named Dundu Shefu. Shefu was believed to be a local commander, tied to recent attacks in the region. The mission was labeled Civil Reconnaissance, a vague term that, in practice, often meant armed patrols looking for intel or contact with enemy elements. The Americans were accompanied by about 30 Nigerian soldiers. They traveled in unarmored pickup trucks, lightly armed and without overhead drone coverage or immediate access to air support. No one expected direct contact. After failing to locate the target, the team turned back toward base. On the way, they stopped in the village of Tongo Tongo, ostensibly to meet with local leaders and gather intel. What they didn't know was that ISGS fighters were already in the area, possibly tipped off about their presence. The stop in the village dragged on longer than planned. Locals stalled. Something felt off. Suspicion grew. As the convoy rolled out of Tongo Tongo just before noon, it was ambushed. Dozens of militants opened fire from multiple directions, some mounted on motorcycles, others in technicals with mounted weapons. The Americans and their Nigerian counterparts were caught in a kill zone. They returned fire, tried to maneuver, but they were exposed without cover in open terrain. Staff Sergeant Brian Black, Staff Sergeant Jeremiah Johnson, and Staff Sergeant Dustin Wright were killed in the initial firefight. Sergeant LaDavid Johnson was separated in the chaos, hunted down over a kilometer away, and killed. It took over an hour for French air support to arrive. Medevac didn't reach the site until hours later. In the days after the ambush, confusion reigned. Initial Pentagon statements were vague. Few in Congress even knew US troops were operating in such a capacity in Niger. Families of the fallen demanded answers. The media picked up the story only when the body of Sergeant LaDavid Johnson was recovered separately. 2 days after the attack. A political firestorm followed. Questions flooded in. Why weren't these soldiers better supported? Why did it take so long to recover the dead? Was the mission properly authorized? An official investigation would later find that the team had deviated from its original low-risk mission and pursued a high-value target without adequate oversight. The report cited a culture of complacency and breakdowns in planning and communication up the chain of command. But for many, the real problem wasn't just tactical, it was strategic. Why was the US operating in such dangerous terrain with so little public awareness or accountability? Was the broader mission in the Sahel coherent or reactive? Were American troops being asked to do too much with too little? The 4 fallen Americans were posthumously honored for their bravery, but their deaths exposed a hidden battlefield and a widening war that few outside the Pentagon were tracking. Tongo Tongo forced the US to reevaluate its footprint in Africa, but it didn't end the mission. The ambush at Tongo Tongo wasn't an isolated event. It was a flashpoint in a much larger, often invisible conflict, one that has only grown more complex since. In the years following the ambush, the Sahel has descended further into chaos. ISGS, along with Jama'at Nasr al-Islam wal-Muslimin, an al-Qaeda affiliate, have continued to gain ground, especially in the tri-border region between Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. Civilian massacres, terrorist attacks, and military coups have followed. France, once the region's primary counterterrorism force, began withdrawing its troops after public backlash and strategic frustration. Into that vacuum, Russia's Wagner Group and other mercenary actors have moved in, offering security assistance in exchange for influence. The US maintained a small footprint in Niger, including a major drone base in Agadez. But in 2023, following a coup that overthrew the Nigerian president, American forces were asked to leave. The counterterrorism mission in the Sahel, already strained, was left in limbo. The war that killed 4 American soldiers in 2017 has not gone away. It has simply morphed, becoming more clandestine, more volatile, and harder to define. Tongo Tongo was a warning, a glimpse at the cost of fighting shadow wars on the edge of the map, where objectives are murky and allies are fragile. For the men who fought there, it was real. For those who follow, the terrain is no less dangerous and the mission no more clear. Staff Sergeant Brian Black, Staff Sergeant Jeremiah Johnson, Staff Sergeant Dustin Wright, Sergeant LaDavid Johnson. Their names were etched into the national consciousness for a moment, amid controversy, confusion, and political noise. But beyond the headlines, they were soldiers on a mission few understood, fighting in a place few could find on a map, killed in a war America never declared. The ambush at Tongo Tongo pulled back the curtain on a quiet front in the global war on terror. It exposed the risks of relying on small, scattered teams in unstable regions. And it raised a question that lingers still. How many battles are we fighting that no one sees? The world has shifted. The war on terror has gone gray, fought by special operations teams, drones, and proxies. But the danger hasn't disappeared. It's evolved. And when things go wrong, they go wrong fast. Tongo Tongo wasn't just a tragedy. It was a lesson, one written in blood, in the dust of a West African village by men who fought until the end. Their story deserves to be told, not just for what went wrong, but for what it says about the wars America fights in silence. This was Tongo Tongo. This was the cost.